did a Renaissance painter cut the corner? Before I try to clarify and answer this question, I would like to ask you a question in return. Who in the audience here today is familiar with the painter Filippo Lippi? Oh, quite a few. I expected a lot less hands to show after that question, but I hope you're not going to criticize me too much after this. For me, Filippo Lippi was one of the cleverest painters of the period we commonly refer to as the Italian Renaissance, and possibly one of the cleverest painters who ever lived. The Fra that graces his name stands for friar, for he was a member of the Carmelite order in Florence, based at the church of Santa Maria del Carmine. In this church, that also houses the famous Brancacci Chapel, the young Filippo Lippi was ordained as priest sometime around the year 1425. Filippo is probably most famous for pictures such as this Madonna and Child, now in the Uffizi. A picture-perfect rendition of the Holy Mother and Infant Christ that must be one of the best-selling postcards in the museum's gift shops. At the same time, Filippo, even though he was a member of a religious order, endured quite a bad reputation. He often took a very long time to finish his commissions, getting into conflict with his patrons, or not finishing his work at all. In his life, written by Giorgio Vasari, in which the portrait we see here graced the first page, the biographer recounted many stories about the friar painter's troublesome life. In one of the more fantastical ones, Filippo found himself with friends on a small boat off the coast of Ancona when a galley full of Moorish pirates captured the vessel. According to Vasari, Filippo was held as a slave on the pirate ship for an astonishing 18 months. But one day, the young painter managed to make a charcoal portrait of the ship's captain, and his art provided him a passage to freedom. Filippo was rewarded by being set free in Naples. This incredible story is testament to both the power of art and to Filippo's perceived ingenuity and bravura. During his prolific career as a painter, it was often his good relationship with the powerful Medici family that kept him out of trouble, although that did not mean that he didn't get into trouble. When he left Florence for the nearby city of Prato, he met the young nun Lucrezia Buti. Vasari recounts in Filippo's biography that the painter was so enamored with the novice Lucrezia that he literally stole her away from the nuns. And the two ultimately had a son, the equally gifted painter Filippino Lippi. This illicit affair was the subject of many 19th century paintings, as you can see here. And Robert Browning portrayed Filippo Lippi's supposed lustful nature in his eponymous Victorian poem. Browning, in Filippo's voice, described his vow of celibacy. I'm grown a man, no doubt, I've broken bounds. You should not take a fellow 8 years old and make him swear to never kiss the girls. It seems that in life, Filippo cut many corners, although one has to ask what is fact and what is fiction. But as I said at the beginning, Filippo was an incredibly inventive and ingenious painter, and one with a profound theological sensibility to boot, which led him to cut the corner in a very different way. Forgetting reputation and looking at his painting, a different Fra Filippo Lippi appears. Between May 1452 and January 1466, Filippo and a number of assistants executed an extensive fresco program in the Cathedral of Santo Stefano, in the same town where he met the young Lucrezia. The left wall of the choir was reserved for a cycle of the life of Saint Stephen, one of the dedicatory saints of the church. The space to the left of the stained glass window is reserved for Stephen's martyrdom, a foundational moment in Christianity, because it foreshadows the martyrdom of Christ himself, since Stephen was in fact the first ever person to be killed for his Christian faith. It is this section of the wall painting that I want to look at with you this evening in more detail. Saint Stephen kneels, his arms outstretched as he looks up to the sky. Behind him, a group of 4 young men is depicted in the act of stoning. 3 of them have their right hand up in the air, clenched onto their rocks, which are about to be hurled down at the head of the soon-to-be saint. The figure in the middle uses both hands to launch the rock with more precision but less force. Following this rock upwards, past the outstretched hand of the culprit, the subject of Stephen's upturned gaze becomes visible. Up in the sky, the purple heavens open up to reveal a group of thick clouds that carry a rainbow forming an arch. Encircled by angels, here above the heads of the violent mob that is seemingly unaware of the miracle, Christ himself looks down upon Stephen, echoing the outstretched gesture of the martyr, enforcing their bond. From his celestial realm, Christ guides a blue-garbed angel carrying a crown. The heavenly rays emanate through the crown's circular shape to reach Stephen's head. The scene of martyrdom does not end here, however. Filippo created continuity around the corner of the chapel. Although painted on separate walls, the scene is one and the same. Following the rocky floor, ridge, and the meandering brook, a second figural group is depicted, slightly further away from the saint. This group consists of 7 figures, of which the one in front, in the red tunic, shows a strong physical resemblance to the group of 4 behind Stephen. He too is casting a rock at the saint, but from the wall across the corner of the chapel. The stones cast by the tormentor in red need to traverse across the walls, cutting the corner, to reach the painted Stephen through the actual space of the church choir. The reason that Filippo highlighted this exact moment in the cycle of Stephen's life by cutting the corner with such ingenuity has a good reason. Besides being dedicated to the first martyr, the cathedral in Prato possesses an important relic of Stephen's martyrdom. Set in an elaborate late 16th century silver reliquary, held here by the Bishop of Prato, Franco Agostinelli, a stone is clearly visible in its glass casing, encircled by martyr's palms. This stone, or sasso as it's called in Italian, is in fact one of the stones believed to be used in St. Stephen's stoning. The stone is kept in a special cupboard, built into the wall of one of the cathedral's other chapels, where it is normally kept from view. On St. Stephen's Day, the day after Christmas, the relic is at the center of a full day of celebrations. The sacred stone is processed through the church and is ultimately placed on the high altar. From that moment onwards, Stephen's martyrdom is remembered and celebrated in sermons and liturgy. If we take another look at the painted stoning, the importance of stone and rock in the fresco becomes more apparent. Stones are abundant in Filippo's wall painting. The rocky ridge and extending mountain landscape, the boulders formed by this landscape, the pebbles shaped by the meandering brook lying on its bed, they all play an integral part in Stephen's death by stoning. The scene reminds the viewer of one of the founding relics of the cathedral, the actual stone. In Fra Filippo's illusionistic use of fresco painting on the adjoining chapel walls, stones move beyond the painted realm into real space, cutting the corner. The stones do not actually traverse the space of this corner, but their movement is implied. Their presence is not real, and yet they reference the presence of the sacred stone, the relic of St. Stephen. But there's more to it still. The idea that Christ is the foundation stone, the cornerstone, the keystone, and the coping stone of the church and Christianity runs through the New and Old Testament. This metaphor for Christ appears in the biblical books of Isaiah, the Psalms, and Paul's letters, among others. But what does this so-called Christ stone mean for Fra Filippo Lippi's painting of the stoning? We have already seen the current bishop of Prato, Franco Agostinelli, deliver a sermon on his feast day in honor of St. Stephen. One of the most important bishops of them all, St. Augustine, described the stoning of St. Stephen in one of his own sermons for St. Stephen's Day. This day is triumphal, fortunate people. The day of the martyr St. Stephen is a triumphal one. Condemned to death by stoning, he was cast headlong out of the city by stone. His body was murdered, his head wounded. He, shattered by stone, was crowned in a cornerstone. In Augustine's sermon for the saint, his final moment of despair and death coincides with him being crowned by the cornerstone. That cornerstone was in fact Christ. A sermon such as St. Augustine's, with its stone symbolism, parallels the ingenuity of the corner in Fra Filippo's fresco of the stoning. The stones of martyrdom traverse the adjacent walls of the chapel corner in its suggestive use of real space. Filippo's illusionism makes the weapons of Stephen's executioner into cornerstones. The stoned first martyr Stephen and Christ, the cornerstone, share an immediate connection in Christianity and in the moment depicted by the painter Friar. Beyond the scene painted on the cathedral walls, Filippo's cutting of the corner acknowledges the real stone relic in the church and the symbolic cornerstone, Christ. It seems then that in Prato Cathedral, Filippo did not only cut the corner for a good reason, but in an ingenious and meaningful way had taken a wall painting off the wall. Thank you very much.